Are you using your strengths on a daily basis? Studies show that only 25% people use their strengths daily. That means 75% of the people aren't tapping into their strengths to reach their full potential. Imagine what's possible when you leverage your strengths daily to unlock your career potential. What's possible for you? What can you achieve? What impact can you make? If you want to reach your next level in your career, then this episode on how to unlock your career potential is for you. I'll be having a fireside chat with my guest, Shawn Mandel, who's a Chief Digital Officer and Technology Executive. Hello and welcome to the Dare to Differentiate live show. Whether you're tuning in live or watching the replay, I am so delighted that you're here. Type in the comment to let us know where you are tuning in from. I'm your host, Diana YK Chan, LinkedIn top voice and founder of My Marketability, where I help you stand out, get hired, and earn more. All right, so I got to share some quick success stories here. Last week, I had 4 clients who landed amazing job opportunities and really, really proud of them. Thought I would share some quick stories before I introduce our guest here. So one of my client who made a pivot into the tech industry as a senior strategy manager after waiting for almost a couple of months of completing like case studies to finally make this happen. It was a newly created role. Second is my other client who completed her MBA and is pivoting from the medical device industry to the tech industry in a marketing specialist role through one of my referrals, and she totally crushed her case interview as well. My third client is another client, a dear friend of mine, who aced her first set of interviews after being on mat leave for 2 years and haven't gone for interviews for years, like over 5 years, and aced her very first interview. And then my other client, who is also pivoting from entrepreneurship back to corporate as a senior UX researcher. So things are happening. It is a candidate's job market. So if you are on the hunt there, continue to stay proactive and have a positive attitude there. All right. So we have lots of folks here coming in from, where do we have? Northern Virginia, Turkey, New York, Ontario, Toronto, Calgary. Welcome. UAE. Amazing. Amazing. Awesome. So today, what we're going to talk about is how to unlock your career potential. And today's agenda is what I'm going to cover with Shawn is he's going to share a little bit about his career journey, his lessons learned, and then we're going to talk about promotions, people skills, and planning your career. I have a set of questions I'll be asking him, and we're going to be taking questions from you as well. Okay, so some housekeeping. Replay will be available on my YouTube channel where I'll be adding timestamps later on as well, so you can check out that later on. Remember, if you have a question for us, type in a question in front of it so I can see the questions coming in. And then if we're not connected yet, make sure to follow me on my LinkedIn, YouTube, or Instagram there. And I want to really encourage you to click like and comment anytime so that we can have an engaging conversation. Share your thoughts, key learnings, and questions. Engage with one another and show your appreciation. I really want to raise the vibrational energy here as well. Share your kind words to show your support. Type in "Go Shawn." He's already backstage. All right, so a little bit about Shawn. I met Shawn about 4 years ago through another mutual connection, and I had the honor to support him twice through both of his career transitions in the last several years. And Shawn, to me, he's a very charismatic person, well-connected. He's really good at connecting people, building great relationships, and just all-around great person to learn from there. So let me introduce a little bit about Shawn. Shawn is a Chief Digital Officer and Technology Executive. As an executive leader, he leverages a robust set of skills and experience to transform organizations and drive positive, lasting change to position organizations as both industry and market leaders. Based at the intersection of business and technology, his career encapsulates a blend of expertise in product, software development, business transformation, digital, data, and IT development and operations. He's led some of the most transformative initiatives for Canada's top brands, including Cineplex, TELUS, and Rogers. Shawn has a broad experience across the technology, telecommunications, e-commerce, retail, and media and entertainment sectors. All right, are you guys excited to welcome Shawn to the stage here? All right, let's type in "Go Shawn" here. Let's bring him on stage. Hey, Shawn.
Hey, good morning. No pressure after that intro, eh?
Well, thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate your time and your insights for being with us today.
It's great. I'm excited and great intro and happy to see all the success you're having, Diana, and always a pleasure to connect with you.
Thank you. Thank you. And we have an international audience. We have people from all over right now. Trinidad, yeah, all over right now. Amazing, amazing. So we're going to start off with some rapid fire questions first. Is what fulfills you? What are your core values?
Probably break that into two.
Yeah.
I think it took me a long time to figure out the answer to those questions. But when I step back and think about what fulfills me and some of the accomplishments I've had, I kind of reminisce in my transition out of TELUS when I went to Cineplex. And I remember reflecting on my time. And it was the one thing that really stood out was just the impact you had on so many other people's lives. And so
Yeah.
the ability to breed leaders, the ability to work in cross-functional teams and just have an impact on other people. And so whether it was folks that maybe didn't work directly for you that got great opportunities by being part of a team that you were on, or folks that work directly inside of your organization that either got promoted into other roles or just moved on to other organizations. So when I step back and think a lot about like what I value and what fulfills me, it's this idea of making other people successful. And if I can have this effect on other people, I get satisfaction out of that. And I think as I've grown and become more senior in my roles, that's kind of your job, right? Like your job
Yeah.
is to make the people around you better. And if I can do that well and watch them succeed, that's how I get fulfilled.
Amazing. I love that. Helping others succeed. That's what fulfillment is for you. Amazing. So let's dive into your career journey. Tell us a little bit about your career highlights. Was there a career defining moment that really changed the trajectory of your career?
I had an interesting kind of run. I had the opportunity to start working at a very young age. So I had odd jobs just like everybody else, whether it was summer jobs or working inside of a family business. So I had the opportunity to kind of get those hourly jobs working in warehouses when you were quite young. So I built up a bit of a bit of a work ethic, if you will. And, when I was in university, school went on strike and we all had to look for jobs because we couldn't get to class. And I found an opportunity at the Rogers organization. It was actually a contract job making 17 bucks an hour for 6 months. And I was able to parlay that into, rapid growth. And so that job became a full-time job and then became an analyst job. And I just kept growing within that organization. And so I had an amazing 7-year run within that company. My last role was a director role. I was starting with a contractor 7 years ago. And if I reflect on that kind of brief stint in my career of about 20 years, the things that reflect on me were the folks that I was surrounded by. I actively sought out mentors and folks that weren't necessarily my age, but people who have been in the industry for 20 years. And I went out of my way to spend a lot of time with them. So if part of this conversation today is about career potential and highlights for me, I can reflect back on the folks that I was surrounded by that mentored me, taught me, and just kind of helped me cut my teeth and learn and grow. And I would say those were some of my most transformative and defining years. And there's a few folks that come to mind. I don't need to name them and go into the details, but, actively seek out those, mentors because they're going to make a huge difference. But I would say that the big pivot in my defining moment is as I transitioned into the TELUS organization. So this was about 14 years ago now. And that was an amazing experience because the first part of my job was leading a very large multi-billion-dollar network transformation program. And I remember in the first few months of that job, wondering if I had this like imposter syndrome, like, was I the right person to take on this massive initiative? And I remember one of my mentors and mentioning to me is like, sometimes you don't know that you've been groomed for the situations that you drop into. Right. So you might not think that you're ready for that type of opportunity, but you kind of jump into it and you realize that, hey, for the last 7-8 years, I've actually been groomed to take this on. And so that was an amazing experience, 4 years, driving that network transformation program. And that was probably the greatest experience that I had because the pressure was on, the stakes were high. There was a lot of focus on the work that we were doing. And I felt that it really drove me and the team around me to bring our A game. Like, we had to bring our A game. Failure was not an option. After that kind of stint, I got an opportunity to take on the digital organization at TELUS. And there's a lot of stories out there about the accomplishments of that team. If you actually go to telus.com/digital, I think, back to values, and something that I really believe in is like transparency and being open and being a bit vulnerable. So if you actually go to the blog on telus.com/digital, there are a million stories of lessons learned, lessons from the trenches, successes and failures that I think are quite valuable. And that was an amazing experience for me. So that was about a 7-year run. Really enjoyed it. Felt that I needed to maybe get more traditional CIO, CTO experience. Ran into a gentleman named Ellis Jacob, who's a legend in Canada, that started Cineplex, serial entrepreneur, amazing leader, and got a chance to spend a bunch of time with him, working within the Cineplex organization. I was there about 18 months, and it was probably about 5 years of experience in 18 months. You had this transformation phase, you had this acquisition phase, you had this COVID phase. Let's just say it was a once in a lifetime opportunity, that's for sure. And then I got an opportunity to propel back into the Rogers organization. And I think that the last year of that was difficult, but at the same time, I learned a ton. And I think that's one thing that I always reflect on, that there's always a lesson to be learned from the experiences you have. And for me, I learned a ton in the last year or so. And I look forward to what's next, Diana.
That's amazing. I love to hear that. Thank you for sharing that, the journey and the growth there. And so when you look back, really, what has helped you get to where you are in your career? I know you talked about seeking mentors earlier. What are some of those key factors contributed to your career success, particularly moving into leadership management roles?
It's a good question. I remember as I was transitioning out of Rogers into TELUS, and I remember, and stories are important, so I'm just going to tell stories. There's going to be a lot of stories today. But I remember a gentleman who joined the organization at Rogers as I was transitioning out. And I wasn't necessarily so aligned with that individual's approach to how they came into the organization, how they seek to understand the culture, the meeting the people, respecting the organization, just not necessarily dragging like all the things they would have done in a previous company, but really drinking the Kool-Aid of the new place they just went to, the new experience they were about to have. So I remember that as I transitioned into the TELUS organization, I was reflecting, I'm like, this is a big change. Like, what am I going to do? What's the mantra I'm going to create? What are the values I'm going to live by as I make this career shift? And I came up with this kind of mantra that I lived by, and I still live by for to this day, which is this idea that like respect leads to credibility, credibility leads to trust, and trust leads to influence. And they're very linear. Like you can't hop over one and go to the other. And so for me, the idea that respecting people, respecting culture, understanding an organization, understanding the people around you is super important. And if you do that well and you do that in a tactful way, people will respect you. And then because of your expertise and your experience, as you start asking questions and engaging in the dialogue, people will start to see you as credible, and you'll establish that credibility. Right. And then, then follows that is trust, because people are like, wow, this individual's come in, they've respected us in the company. They obviously know what they're talking about. I think I can trust this person. They're building a relationship with me. And then that can help you lead to influence. And so that idea encapsulated became a little bit of my mantra for how I've approached the various opportunities that I've had to tackle and take on. And so, it's those lessons learned, to be honest with you, watching someone else maybe crash and burn a little bit, which helped me define a lot of my approaches. So that mantra for me is super important. And I can't underestimate, again, the value of mentorship and actively seeking out people that become your champions and become your support network. It makes all the difference in the world.
That is amazing to hear that. And I'm curious to hear from the audience. Like, have you found mentors in your career? Type in the comment to share with us here. I love that quote. I just want to repeat here. Like, respect leads to credibility. Credibility leads to trust. That's such a powerful mantra: respect, credibility, and trust that you carry there. So thank you for sharing that, Shawn. I want to dig a little further about your lessons learned from building the TELUS Digital team from the ground up. Right? Essentially, it was like a startup within a big organization. I don't know if you can share some stories or some of those biggest lessons learned during those times there.
Yeah, listen, this was 10 years ago, right? So I think the opportunity to experiment and sandbox in the digital arena was probably a bit more greenfield, and like it was more opportunistic than it might be today. A lot of companies have made significant investments. So I think the opportunity we had 10 years ago might not necessarily exist in the same shape or form as it does today. But the long and short of it is we knew we needed to do something different. And we had the support of the leadership to kind of do a 180 on the way things were done, right? And this isn't unique to TELUS. This is, kind of the story in many organizations is things take too long, things are too expensive, and the quality isn't at the level of fidelity that you're looking for. And so we said, well, how do we change that equation? And so we actually took a lot of inspiration from the lean startup movement. And so this is like Eric Ries, lean startup. Do I even have the book on my bookshelf like 10 years ago? And decided that, this idea of corporate entrepreneurship or intrapreneurship was a thing. And we created a small team and gave them the autonomy and the safe space to experiment. And it was an amazing story. And I think, over that first kind of 3-year window, we had a lot of successes. We got a lot done, but we also made a ton of mistakes. And I think we had the foresight, and we also had, the culture to kind of acknowledge that, we were failing, we weren't doing certain things well, and we had to pivot. And we started to embrace just a different way to scale and how to build software and how to surround teams around software so that you could build it in a very scalable fashion. So I think the biggest lessons learned from that TELUS Digital experience are all about not being afraid to celebrate failure, around that idea of experimentation, and this idea of like, what does it take to scale from like a very small team of 20, 30, 50 people to multiple hundreds of people? Because if you don't have the right standards and processes and documentation and governance in place, you're not going to be able to scale for that many individuals. And I think that over time, I've grown to be a big fan of governance and standards and process, because I actually think they enable innovation, right? And if you can establish the right guardrails for people to operate in, but not make things too prescriptive that it like squashes the creativity, you can actually create amazing things, because teams can leverage the path that has been blazed by other people and then create their own unique way within the boundaries that you create. So for me, I'd say hands down, the biggest lesson learned was like, how do you scale gracefully? And at the same time, live in the war wounds of not necessarily getting that right out the gate. But again, lots of stories on telus.com/digital. I would say that team is still firing on all cylinders. I met with the head of that team the other day just to catch up. And I'd say that they're probably one of the most sophisticated digital operations you'll find anywhere.
Oh, that's great to hear. On this note, like for those who are evaluating or considering like going into like a startup or like a build or scaling up a team, what advice do you may have for them if they're considering make this jump to going from like a bigger company to or starting something from brand new? What are some things to consider there?
It depends. Like if you're moving from a large company to a small company, it's a question of like, what type of resource do you need around?
Did we lose Shawn there? Oh, the internet. Oh, let me see here. Did we lose Shawn? All right. Is it me or is it Shawn here right now? Let's see. Just lost him for a moment. So we'll just keep going. See the audience here. Probably just have to refresh there. Oh, yeah. He probably just going to come back. That's no problem. I'll bring him back on. All right. Okay. There's Shawn.
Yeah, that error message popped up and told me I wasn't good enough. But I'm back. You asked about,
Yeah.
individuals moving
Yeah. So the
from.
question is, if someone's considering moving from a bigger like company or team to like a startup team or a new team, what are some things to consider when they're making that career decision?
I think, if you're moving from a big company to a startup, I think in a big organization, you're used to maybe not necessarily a very quick pace. You're used to potentially having more resources and dollars at your disposal. And I think you need to think about like the hours, the roll up your sleeves, and how deep you're getting involved in the type of initiative. Like my wife, for example, is in the middle of building and scaling a startup, and the hours that she's putting in, the type of work that you're doing, you're kind of playing all the roles, right? And I think you have to have an appetite for being scrappy. You have to have an appetite for rolling your sleeves up and kind of working across multiple domains and getting used to being creative to work in an environment where you don't necessarily have all the resources and all the funding to do the things that you might have experienced within a large company. But there is reward on the other side of that, right? So if you have a penchant for hard work, you feel that you're a very good athlete where you can work across multiple domains. And there's lots of upside in the startup world, but you have to remember that for all the success stories, there's probably 100, 1,000 failures that you don't see. So just be mindful that you have to have the energy to really dig into that environment because the resources are far more constrained than what you would experience inside of a large company. Really? So, again, with regards to startup thinking, pre-seed, seed, scale up, it all depends. And I think scale ups, as they've gotten larger funding rounds, are starting to invest. So think about like what One Password has gotten hundreds of millions of dollars. Wattpad just got a huge, investment from another company. And those types of organizations are definitely spending dollars. So again, it all depends on like the stage of that journey. So when you're in that pre-seed stage, you're literally dealing with very scrappy. But as you get into that multiple round phase, that's where the growth is happening. And that's where I think people who come from corporate can add a lot of value within an organization that's gotten big investment and that's starting to scale. Because those that come from insurance or telco or banking or big retail just have a lot of experience in governance and process and standards and just those types of things that a scale up needs to be successful. So, one of the things I might recommend if you're moving from big business down to, let's call it more, scale up, that's a great transition for very seasoned leaders who could get very meaningful roles in those organizations that have lots of upside, where your experience is super valuable to companies that are trying to scale from, a certain employee base and growing, exponentially. Hi, Diana.
You saw that I jumped off, right? I don't know. My computer
I saw, I got your message and I kept going. So, I think we're doing good on the startup question and we can move on.
Amazing, because I saw it keep going and it just something but technology today. That's what with a startup question.
The internet is not your friend today, unfortunately.
It just crashed. I never had that happen, but I see an audience on LinkedIn. There's still 40 of you on LinkedIn right now. So if you're here,
Good.
type in the chat room. I just lost everyone here, but it's still going. Okay. All right. Amazing. Okay. So I still see the audience here. Okay, so moving on. So thank you for sharing that. I'm going to check the replay here on this. So I want to go into career coaching. I know you and I worked a few times together throughout your career transition the last several years. How did career coaching help you with your last two career transitions? And a follow-up question is, why should one invest in career coaching?
Yeah, so I've obviously spent some time with you, Diana, and I also have had another coach that I've worked with as well. And I'd say I've had a couple of unique experiences transitioning into Cineplex, transitioning back into Rogers, and then the role of coaching in that journey. So, working with a coach is super valuable because I think they really pressure test your motivations and the drive for the types of changes that you're trying to make. And you need to really step back and think super carefully about like, what are your values? What are you looking for in an opportunity? Are you trying to go down the same path? Are you trying to have a switch in careers? And to be honest with you, sometimes reflecting and bouncing those ideas off of somebody who has experience working with other leaders is only going to be valuable and helping you build out like a proper plan to manage that transition. So I think we did a good job at that as I transitioned. And I think one of the mistakes I likely made as I moved into the Cineplex organization is I didn't kind of transition with that coach into the company. And one thing that people don't realize is coaching is not just about how I got to find a coach because I got to find a new job, or I got to build my resume, or I got to figure out what industry I want to go into. Coaches can actually help you assimilate into culture, and coaches can actually help you land within companies in a very effective way. And, you know, and I engaged a coach quite actively at Cineplex, and I did the same thing as I went to Rogers. And I think the one thing I probably fully didn't appreciate about career coaching was career coaching isn't about just moving from one to the other. Career coaching can be a very valuable tool as you're landing within an organization, and just having somebody around you that can help you assimilate. That first 90, 180 days, especially during a pandemic, like I've transitioned twice kind of in a pandemic. And, you know, managing very large teams from your basement is not an easy experience. And so having somebody who can work through those issues with you, having somebody that can help you be very deliberate with your time, where you're going to spend your time, considering the level of effort and energy it takes to meet and become like more intimate in terms of relationships with people when you're remote. You know, I can't walk into a room with 50 people and have a conversation like I used to when we were in the office. And so you have to think very strategically about how you spend your time, and having a coach to work through career, culture, your own diary, if you will, has been an amazing experience for me. And I will be an advocate for coaching, you know, for the rest of my career. That's for sure.
That's great to hear. And something I noticed, what you just acknowledged too, is I noticed the past year as a coach is the work I do is beyond job search now. Like, I've had more people actually want to support once they land the job, like the first 90 days, because of this navigating pandemic world, virtual world as well. And just how do I really build my brand, and how do I build relationships? How do I really make an impact at home there? And that's a common question I've been getting a lot. And my other guest speaker a couple of weeks ago, Anthony, who's a CEO, he talked about how he's had a coach for the last 12 years. He meets with his coach like once a month. That consistency to helping him like really staying focused with his career, his leadership, and manage his own life as well.
Well, I think it's an accountability thing, right? Like I think at the end of the day, like, you know, it's funny, I was reflecting as we were just talking around like how many people really stick to their 90-day plan these days, right? You know, you kind of build a 90-day plan as part of your onboarding, and then the next thing you know, it's like out the window. But a coach can help you, you know, hold yourself accountable to making sure that the outcomes, the activities, the actions that you describe, that you're actually holding yourself to account. And I think that's super important as well, because sometimes when you get into the job, you're flying by the seat of your pants, you know, the boss, you know, starts pivoting on you a little bit, which is totally fine. But if you have somebody that you can lean on that holds you accountable, I think there's immense value in that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm curious to hear from the audience. How many of you have invested in a coach? What have you learned and gained from coaching there? By the way, we got a props here. Amira mentioned nice cover. You are pros. We recover from our tech. Awesome. Thank you. Okay. So what we're going to do now is we're going to move into the next segment of our show here, which is we're going to really talk about this topic on how to unlock your career potential there. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask Shawn here what he can answer. So Shawn, how to unlock your career potential?
You know, I was thinking about this, and I don't want to go too long and, you know, throw too many answers out there. I thought about two things. One was, one of the things that I value most when I'm like interviewing or I'm looking to hire the next individual is this idea of being a really, really good lateral thinker. Right? So people who can see across the business, people who understand the impact of one decision and how the outcome could be positive or negative in the other side of the business. In order to be really, really good laterally, you need to be like a serious like cross trainer. You need to work in multiple parts of the organization you're in. So if you're in a big company, you know, the fact that you can move around between different divisions or different departments and get different experience is like super valuable, right? And a lot of companies are obviously interested in like your career potential could be tied to the number of various roles you've had within the company that you're in. And so for me, like this idea of lateral thinking and being, you know, a cross trained, like an athlete, if you will, is like super important. And that's a way to unlock your potential. One tactic for that, so maybe the second piece, which is like go seek out like a stretch assignment, right? Like if you're doing your job and you're doing it well and you're looking for something new, if you will, there's no harm in going to the boss or the boss's boss in a skip level discussion and asking for some sort of stretch opportunity. There's always things happening across the organization that you can get involved in cross-functionally, or that you can take on and actively lead a program to improve your department, like whatever it may be. So like this idea of lateral thinking, this idea of being an athlete who has varied experience, and a tactic to go seek that out is like, go try and take on a stretch assignment. It might get you experience in another place that you didn't know that you had a passion for. And it also is probably going to help you demonstrate that, you're getting out of your lane, and that, you have the energy to do more.
That's such great advice, especially around that seeking the stretch assignment, because you're going to learn something new. You're going to develop new skills, and you're going to showcase a different side of you as well. So that's great to hear that. So a follow-up question to this is how to really showcase your value and readiness for next level leadership roles. What are some of the communication tips to reinforce your readiness for advancement? And I know you may have some examples as well for this.
Yeah, a couple. I think it's about being strategic around how you go about it. So I had a couple of instances in the last few jobs where literally on day, like, rolled into the organization on day one, met, some of the new folks that were working for me. And it happened twice. I had two individuals basically tell me, when am I going to promote them? No names, like no levels, like it's not really relevant. And it was just like, hey, I'm Shawn, nice to meet you. And the first thing you're asking me was, you were promised something in the past, or you feel that you're ready for something, and we're literally having like the first conversation. So probably not the right approach. But what I would say though is, and I understand the desire to have those conversations, I think it's about how you do it. And I think that we used to talk a lot about the good old career development plan, right? And if you think about the step ladders that would get you, if you will, up, right? You have a set of skills and accomplishments that are kind of, minted for a certain level. And then to move up, you do this, plus this, plus this, and you keep on moving up. So there's nothing stopping you from actively working with your HR person, with a coach, with your support person in the office, to actually build out a plan and say, what are the activities and outcomes? What are the things that I can do to demonstrate that I'm ready for the next level? And you hammer out 3 to 5 things. You outline what they are, you outline how you're going to demonstrate them. Maybe there's somebody who can sponsor you to do them. Maybe it's a peer, maybe it's someone in another department. And so I think that's more of a strategic way to go about that, which is, hey, I'm interested in propelling my career. Here are the things I think I've accomplished. Here are the strengths that I have. Here are the opportunities that I want to improve and invest in. How can you help me do that? And like that, in some ways, is basically saying, hey, like, I think I'm ready for the next level, or I want to invest in the next level, but you don't need to be so forward about it. And I've had folks be very forward. Good news is one of them has got a promotion and their time, and they did a great job, through some coaching and some career development planning, but I invested in them. And I think if you approach it in a very strategic and structured way, the people are going to sponsor you, and they're going to support you, and they're going to help you make it happen. But I definitely wouldn't on the first day ask when, you're going to get promoted, when you just met maybe the new boss.
That is such great advice. And I'd love to hear the audience, if anyone had made some of these mistakes, right? That that you deserve this promotion, but how do you really go about it effectively and strategically so that you can also get sponsored by that as well? So
it's also frustrating then. And like, there's been so much turnover in the last couple of years, and people build up equity with people.
Yeah.
Right. And so it becomes super frustrating, right? Because I just spent the last, bunch of years with a certain individual, and now my champion's gone and I have to reestablish a relationship. Or how many times have I heard I've had 6 or 7 bosses in the last how many years because of reorgs and different things? And that's like draining for people, because you might be like, I don't know, like a product manager who's ready to be like the manager of that team. And you've been like working super hard for many, many years, driving this agenda, and have been very successful, but there's no continuity in your leadership structure. And that can be exhausting. But I think what can hold the test of time is if you have an artifact that is like this, development plan that can transcend the leaders or the movements that you're in, and also demonstrate that like you're thinking strategically about your career. So it takes work though, right? Like, at the end of the day, you have to lean into it. It's your career. And I've always said to people that I will invest, but like, it's your career path is your responsibility, not mine. But I will always invest in you if you want the time, if you, have the right questions, if you block, whatever it may be. So just throwing that out there is something to think about.
That's such great advice. Have a plan, track your success as well, document things. I think that's great advice there. So, my next question is how to get noticed by management as high potential talent? What are some of the common themes that contribute to accelerated success?
Had so many different examples. Like when I first joined the Rogers organization, this gentleman made a video for me. It's like 45 minutes long. I watched the whole thing. He sent it to me.
Wow.
Welcome to the company. I did a bunch of research about you. I'm really excited that you're here. I created this video for you. Here's the stuff that's going well. Here's the stuff I think needs to be improved. He was a manager. He ended up getting promoted to director. We spent a lot of time together. He was great. And that really stood out to me. Like I'm the type of leader who will make a lot of time for people. So I also think it depends on making sure you're reading your audience appropriately. So like,
Mm.
who is management? What experiences do they have? What's their style? What's their approach? Have you been talking to people that know them and just understand them a little bit? Because what might work for me, a 40-minute video, a random reach out over like Teams, or just someone who wants to get my time on the calendar, I'll do that. But that's not for everybody. So I think there's different ways to get noticed by management. The question is, who is your audience? And what are their preferences? What's their approach? What's their style? And I think you have to meet and match that need. But like all those things apply. Like you could create a video, you could send them a random email, you could look for time in their calendar, you could again seek out stretch assignments. All of those things apply. But I would spend less time necessarily thinking about like one tactic and spend more time thinking about like who's the audience and what's the right way to land the message with that audience. And then there's dozens of tactics that you can apply to get attention. It's not difficult, but it takes thought.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. Like really knowing your audience, what they care about. So you appreciate that 45-minute video that you got.
Yeah, I watched the whole thing. It was great. It was very
Wow.
helpful.
Yeah.
And it was also, I've always just been a big believer in creating like a safe environment for people to raise their opinions. And I think a lot of people sometimes suffer and, like where they just don't feel safe to say, hey, I think this is broken, or hey, I think we're doing this well over here. I think we should scale it and do it more pervasively across the team. And I think that just that idea that like in a very short period of time, I don't know if it was something I did, or maybe it was this individual's just kind of orientation, they just felt comfortable doing that. And that for
Yeah.
me was like a big lesson learned that I had many years ago. I remember I was at like an all team event, couple hundred people in a room. I'm standing up in front of the group, doing my thing. And a team member comes up in a Q&A and puts his hand up. And let's see if there's hundreds of people in the room, executives, everybody. This guy's, I think, he must have been like an analyst at the time, so quite junior, but everybody has an opinion, so it doesn't matter. And he just got up and started, you know, I'm trying to use the most appropriate word, but just wasn't happy. Didn't feel they had context. What was the direction? What was the strategy? And just all of these questions. And in my mind, I'm like, wow, we just spent the last 3 days talking about all these things. So maybe they were paying attention. So you had this moment where you're like, you got to feel like you got to get a kick in the gut, meaning like, am I not doing a good job selling the story about where we're going as an organization? But in that moment, I had this like flip. And the flip was, so wait a second, like, this isn't a bad thing. The fact that this individual felt comfortable and safe to stand up in a room with hundreds of people to raise their voice, and like, that was like, for me, a huge moment in my career. And it
Mhm.
wasn't this, oh my God, I'm not doing my job well. I can't believe this person doesn't understand the roadmap and the strategy and all the things we're doing. It was that moment of like, wait a second, I've created an environment and a culture that's safe for people to feel that their opinion matters and to speak
Yeah.
up. And that was a huge transformational moment for me. It was like this 3-minute window, like, I don't know, 9 years ago, whenever the time frame was. And it
Yeah.
changed a lot for me in terms of how I thought about culture.
Wow, I love that. Thank you for sharing that because I mean it really speaks to as a leader, the type of leader you want to be and the type of environment you want to create where people are willing to speak up and to share how they're feeling. And I'm curious to hear a little bit more because you mentioned about how people get noticed, besides a video. I feel like that's like next level there.
Never had
How
that
do you how do you
before.
feel about, when someone has completed, let's just say, a big project, a big initiative, and they really recap like their wins, like how to go about doing that effectively, where they feel it's effective, but without also like bragging too much about it. Like what's a good way to do that?
Well, it depends on what it is, but listen, you're always going to have some sort of program project closeout type report, right? And I think that like what's the so what? What's that exec summary that kind of clearly and succinctly outlines the wins or the losses or the lessons learned from the experience that you have? And I think that it's not about self-promotion, which is I think what you're saying, Diana, like how do you avoid this like self-promotion thing? But I think that you might have an obligation, again, like I said, to leave an organization, if you will, in a better place than you found it. So if you have discovered a nugget, if you have discovered a practice or a thing that should be scaled and done more pervasively and it's not, or hey, we managed this project like super well, we could apply this practice to all the other things that we do, folks like me or others want to hear that. And so I think you have to figure out again who the audience is. Is there a natural forum for these types of conversations? If there isn't, is there a way for you through your manager to have that conversation, or even just going around it and having like a proactive reach out? I always appreciate those types of things. And if you can be very succinct in summarizing, that's always important. So if you have like a really long deck, that's okay. 20 slides, 10 slides, it doesn't matter. But always put the so what up front. Hey, we're going to spend 30 minutes going through this table of contents, but if you wanted me to summarize it in 5 bullet points, here it is, right? Yeah. And you might be surprised. You could end up spending 30 minutes on that 5 bullet point slide, having a really effective conversation, or you might want to dive into the material. And I think that, figuring out a way to so what it and get it to like the 5 points is really going to help, and, helps you kind of pivot and adapt to where the conversation takes you versus spending an hour to get to the point.
Oh, I love that advice. Figure out a way to so what it. It's just something I talk a lot about with my clients, like the so what aspect of what you've done. Like what are the benefits? What's the impact? What's the bottom line here? If you can so what that's like tying back into the business as well, tying back to the impact.
And sometimes it's good to bookend. Like, so we used to build decks where you had like the exec summary was the first slide and the last slide.
Yeah.
Right. It was kind of the opener here. If we're only going to get past the slide, this is what it's about. And if we get through the whole material, just a reminder of what we just spoke about. Like there's actually a strategic way to think about storytelling where you could actually bookend the same slide to open and to close. And that might help you in this conversation you want to have, to talk about your wins.
Yeah. Amazing. So folks, if you're here, feel free to ask us any questions, type in the questions. I know there were some questions earlier that I lost, but I remember there was a question, Shawn, from someone was how to go about finding a mentor.
I don't want to say it's complicated. If I reflect on the people that I surrounded myself with, I remember Dan was great. So I was very, very young in my early 20s, working through the Rogers organization. And Dan and I worked on a bunch of projects together. Dan was like a 25-year vet. Dude knew everything. And we just spent time together, coffees, projects, lunches, sat close to him, and just would work through it. And so it's just building a relationship through the mechanisms that are available to you. So whether it's simple coffees or lunches, whether it's working on a project together, like that lended well. And Dan probably had a major impact on like my detail orientation. So when I step back and say, wow, like the test cases I used to write, the documentation we used to generate, the processes we used to create, like I can reflect back on all those experiences I had, with him, for example. But then the mentors changed and grew, and different mentors likely become champions of yours. So it could be, for example, if you're like a manager in an organization and you're working with some directors across other teams and you spend a lot of time with them in the nature of your job, that those are natural opportunities for mentors. Like, are you reaching out to those individuals to have conversations with them? And you might be surprised that like not a ton of people might get like a mentoring request, and also if you can define the rules of engagement, that's super important. Like, don't waste people's time. Don't reach out to have a mentor conversation with somebody, have a coffee for like 25 minutes, have no agenda, and then don't follow up, right? So if you want a mentor, be prepared. If you want a mentor, have an agenda. If you want to mentor, don't waste people's time. Because I think a lot of people who might have had struggles with mentorship are thinking that like it's on the mentor, but it's actually on the mentee who needs to
Mm,
invest and spend the energy to make it a success. And like for me, when I reflect, like that's what I did. I always had an agenda. I was always making sure I had good questions or making the most valuable use of that person's time. And if you're making good use of someone's time, they're going to give you the time.
yeah. Being well prepared, being proactive. I love that. So, but what builds onto this, Shawn, I know I consider you really good with networking. I feel like you're one of the people that I know who's really good at staying in touch with people. And one of the common struggles I hear from a lot of people is how to go about building a strong professional network. And I hear this a lot, where especially for those who've been at the same company for a long time and haven't really taken the time to build their network outside of their company or outside of their industry. What advice do you have, and perhaps even what not to do there?
Yeah, I guess I'm lucky because I had an opportunity to build a lot of my network predominantly kind of through two vehicles. One is, I had a big job in a company where a lot of people would reach out and want to spend time understanding what we were doing. The other thing was I had a chance to go to a ton of conferences over the many years, and you can network through that environment. And with COVID and virtual, it's not as easy. So I totally sympathize with the current kind of situation. And also, I would say the third thing for me, which is also important, is I kind of respond to a lot of messages. So, sometimes your LinkedIn blows up, you get a lot of cold calls, or you're getting a lot of random emails from salespeople or messages. The world is a very small place, my friends. You never know where people are going to end up. You never know who knows who. So I always made an effort to actually just talk to people. And so I used to get on like really short calls. So if I was driving home from work and I had like a 30-minute ride, I would take like, 3 calls in 10 minutes. Hey, call me at this time or text me. And I would just get on quick calls and just do very, very rapid conversations with a lot of different people. And so I was very open and transparent, which kind of was very helpful in terms of building relationships. Leveraging conferences and networking events to meet people was super helpful, and being very responsive to when people reach out to you, knowing that, hey, if I'm going to message Shawn, he's going to get back to me. He might not have the time, but I know I'm going to hear back. Is something that has worked. What not to do? Don't do nothing. You know,
Yeah.
and again, like being strategic about these things. But like, what is the point of the network that you want to create? What outcome is that network maybe going to create for you? What value can you add back into that network? So, building a network is, I guess in the LinkedIn age, it's actually not that difficult. The question is like, how many of the people that you're connected with do you actually connect with? That would actually be a great algorithm for LinkedIn to run, which is like, okay, like
Yeah.
I might have X number of connections. How many actual connections do I really have? So, there's ways to connect with people. It's actually what you do with that connection that matters. So don't do nothing, and be strategic around the folks that you want to connect with and what value you can either create for them or the value that they may be able to create for you.
Yeah. I love that advice, right? Being responsive, being proactive, staying in touch with people. These are all things, it's like you have to do it. Like you can't just not do anything in order to nurture that network there. Yeah. That's great advice. I mean, and the other thing is when we think about it, like networking, by staying in touch with people, this is how you also get to know of finding out opportunities, right? Those hidden opportunities are not necessarily posted. Like at the level that you're at, Shawn, is the opportunities you're looking for. It's not necessarily posted sometimes. Like, it really is tapping into your network, right? The last 2 opportunities you landed were through probably people you know or who know you.
Absolutely. And it's interesting, like it's Wednesday, Monday, I'm a free agent team. So if you know any good opportunities, let me know. But I've just started my hunt. And so, what am I doing? Making lists, who's in my network, and connecting with them. And it's been great. Like, I cannot tell you I've reached out to somebody who hasn't returned that. And, whether it's a coffee, whether I'm going to have lunch, whether it's a dinner, whatever it may be. So the next few weeks are quite busy, but my approach to the next career search is all about like, what do I value? What do I want to do? What's important to me and gets me excited and passionate? And want to build a bit of a perspective around how to think about how my experience transcends the industries that I've worked in. and is very transferable, and then building out a bit of an action plan. So I'm not in this like spray and pray, apply for all these different jobs. I'm in this more, I'm going to go meet a ton of people. I'm going to help them reflect with me and help build a point of view around what I want to do. I'm going to tailor my story to that point of view. And then I'm going to get very strategic around the folks and which companies and which industries I want to attack. And so for me, that's the journey I'm on. I'm in like 48 hours in. Let's just say I'll be drinking a lot of coffee and eating a lot of lunch. And I look forward to figuring out what's next. But it's back to the same point around networking or mentorship or growing your career. It's being strategic about it. And that's where I'm at. I'm at that planning stage. And I think there's so many parallels between, the journey I'm about to go on to find my next great opportunity and what it takes for you to find a mentor, or what it takes for you to unlock your career to the next level and get a promotion, or whatever it may be, getting noticed by management internally. So there's a lot of parallels between these things, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. Folks, we're here. What are you learning so far? Shawn is giving so many golden nuggets. Like I'm typing so many notes here that I really appreciate how you shared what your approach is with your next search here. Like, it is really being intentional, being strategic, tapping the people that you know, and being prepared of what is it that you really want and what value that you bring to the table as well. So it's a very strategic, tailored approach to find that right
And
level
it's also the
opportunities.
match, right? The match
Yes.
between, where an individual can be most valuable and most productive, and the environment you need to be in that will enable it. And that for
Absolutely.
me, for example, I'm a bigger transformation type guy. So probably something small and scrappy isn't going to work. So, or, it depends. Right. And so I think that that's the mindset you have to be in, which is how do you pair what you bring to the table with the opportunity that's sitting in front of you? And are the conditions right? And actually back to coaching, like that's where coaches can help to kind of pair and really pressure test to make sure that the environment you think you're wanting to move to is actually the environment you're moving to. What questions have you asked this company? How much detail do you
Yeah.
know? And there's actually ways. They always say that it's hard to really understand the organization unless you're in it, and that's so true. It really
Yeah.
is. You'll never fully understand a situation that you are going to get into unless you're like immersed in it. But if you're really smart, you can ask 10 to 15 questions and probably figure out 85, 90% of it. And I think that's what you have to also think of. And that's where coaches help. Like they can equip you with the ammo that you need in an interview, because you have to remember, you're not the one you're not the only the one being interviewed, but you're interviewing the company that you might be moving to.
That's great insight. Actually, could we maybe dive in a little bit more on that? I've noticed actually this past year I've noticed more people realize after they join an organization, it's not the right organization for them or the right opportunity for them. And perhaps it's also with the pandemic and virtual. What are maybe some questions that you suggest asking to help really assess whether the organization is the right fit or for them, or that culture fit is right for them there?
Um, I recently didn't take an opportunity, maybe about 2 months ago. And it was good. Would have been a great job, but like just wasn't the right time. And there were some things that kind of made me a bit uncomfortable. And a lot of what I did, I went to Glassdoor, I went to Reddit, I went to the forums, and I read trails and trails and trails of team member feedback, right? The good, the opportunities. And I was like, and I looked for themes. And then I started kind of forming questions based off the themes, right? And depending on the company, the companies are going to be quite big, right? So you're going to have different varied experiences and different pockets. And in some ways you might be so far removed from it, but it doesn't matter. It's a bit of a like pixie dust. It's a little bit of like a look into the organization that you're about to join. So there's a lot of questions that you can ask to understand how decisions are made, or how processes work, or funding, or the type of technology they use, and really get a handle on it. One of the things that I've found that's proved most valuable is hunt all the online forums and read all the feedback from the people that work in that company. And then just make some notes, whether it's like scribbling on paper or whatever your kind of, your methodology is, and look for themes and ask questions about the things that you're hearing and reading from other people. And then compare the answers you get to what you're hearing, because, a couple hundred people can't be wrong. Right. And are you getting the goods? And there were some instances where I was asking certain questions and just something didn't feel right, like I wasn't necessarily getting the goods. And so, I always value leaders who will just be transparent, meaning, is the person that you're interviewing in truly preparing you for what you're about to get into, right? And I always felt that like part of my job as a recruiter and as a hiring manager was just being open. Here's the good and here's the not so good. And just making sure that you as an individual don't have that 90 days in going, oh man, what did I just sign up for? And I feel like, you should be really pushing on the people that are hiring you to help you figure that out.
Yeah.
And nothing's better than crawling those online forums, my friends. You will find gold.
Yeah. Do your research, connect the dots as well. And also trusting yourself, trusting your intuition there. Thank you for that advice. I'm actually glad you shared an example of why you decided to say no to an opportunity, that it's okay to walk away from an opportunity, even though you get an offer there. So thank you for acknowledging that. So my other question is, what do hiring managers look for? I know this is a general question, but from your experience, having recruited and interviewed a lot of people, what's really important to you? What's important for the candidate to highlight as well, and what not to do? I know it's a twofold, threefold question here.
I'll give you a simple answer just for the sake of all of it. Typically, the folks that I would be interviewing are very good at their craft or very good at their practice. They're either a design professional, a very good product person, an analytics leader, what have you. So they're obviously very good at what they do. So I spend less time in interviews like busting their chops on their craft or their profession, and spend a far more time on culture and fit and those types of things. And the one thing that I really look for is attitude. Just talk to me about like when did you engage in like the social committee on your team? When did you contribute to the culture of the organization you're in? Tell me about a time you went outside your job description and did something above and beyond, right? I want to hire people who want to leave the place that they are going to in a better place. And folks that go above and beyond and want to contribute to the culture, to the environment, have a really good attitude is super important. They always say attitude versus aptitude, and it's so true. And so for me, I spend a lot of time really sussing out fit. And like if I was creating a culture committee or an engagement action team or folks that are going to help drive, the team member experience into a better place, is that the type of person that's going to lean in? And if I join a call, are they going to be at that table actively contributing, right? So if I'm a developer, I might be really interested in streamlining the developer experience and making it world-class. Are you the person that I'm going to hire that's going to make that happen? That's what I want to know.
That's such great advice there, right? Really looking at the attitude and the fit at the end of the day, which I agree. When I think about when interviewers or candidates come to the level that you're at, would you say, I mean, they've already probably passed through a few rounds already. Like they've already been screened, that, they're probably these are top finalist candidates. So you're at that behind when they get to you, it's really the fit.
I want people that are going to inject energy into the culture. I want people that are going to make the people around them better. I want people that are really going to lean into the social side of it and connect with people. Like being a connector is so important, right? And especially in these times. And I know it's exhausting and it's draining and there's so much there, but like you want to unlock your career potential, you want to move to the next level. Sometimes just doing the bullet points on your job description isn't going to get you there, right? But if you're the person who's leading an engagement team, all the stuff that I just spoke about, like you'd be surprised how far that goes.
Yeah, that you appreciate that. I like that. Yeah. It sounds to me your approach to interviewing as well is more a conversation, like a more casual conversation than a very formal type of interview style there.
Yeah, I like to ask reverse questions. What's your worst reference going to say about you? That's one of my favorite questions, is like try and go like, so, okay, I know what it would be like if I talked to your best reference. So if I called your worst reference, I know X, how does Shawn know that person? Oh my God, what would they say? What experience did they have with you? What did you learn from that experience? The biggest mistakes that you've made, so I'm always trying to I do a lot of inverse questions in interviews, trying to look for self-awareness, trying to understand people who've had like wounds and lessons learned and know that like they can contribute those experiences so maybe we don't make the same mistakes. Like those are the things that I value the most. But if we go back to where this whole conversation started, like there is nothing better than a great attitude.
Yeah. Yeah, that's such great advice there. Amazing. Thank you. I'm curious to hear from the audience. What type of inverse questions have you got in interviews there? Feel free to share with us there. So a couple more questions. We're going to wrap up. I see there's some questions from the audience as well. Shawn, we'd love to hear what do you see are some of the trends and career opportunities in digital and tech right now?
Oh, there's so much. I think I don't need to, go through all the details on them, but like, what's the best way to answer this question?
And for those who are looking to break into this career.
And I'm just thinking about it, like the trends and career opportunities are endless, right? Like, there's product roles, there's analytics roles, there's development roles, there's design roles, there's experience roles. Like the list is really endless. But for me, when I really think about some of the trends, to be honest with you, like getting back to basics, being super consistent, the trends that I'm seeing is, a lot of companies have spent a lot of dollars and invested in large teams and are doing really pretty interesting stuff in this space. But what they struggle with is how to do it at scale. And they struggle with a level of like consistency. One of the things we always used to say was building up something to be excellent was actually the easy part. It was actually maintaining that excellence that was the hard part, right? And so I think a lot of organizations are really looking at like, how to get back to basics, how to be consistent, how to be really good operationally. So to be honest with you, folks in digital and technology kind of orientation type roles need good operators, need people that know how to build processes and standards and be consistent in how they practice maybe software development, for example. So you'd be quite surprised that a lot of maybe what people might think as more traditional roles are becoming so valuable in the digital and technology space. Like I could give you the token answer to that question, but I want to give you an answer born out of my experience, which is scaling is hard and being consistent is the ticket. Like, if you have dozens and dozens of agile teams building software inside of an organization, and they have like common rituals and common practices and common scorecards and common approaches to like engaging a customer or doing research, like, man, that's like the dream, right?
Yeah.
And so, to be honest with you, being really, really good is just kind of being boring and consistent these days, right? And so, I thought I'd give you a bit of a different answer to maybe what you were expecting.
No, I think that's great. I mean, this goes back to also just building your brand and reputation, being really good at what you do as well, which ties into this next question from the audience here is around, can you give some advice in closing skills gap for mid-senior role moving into a different industry, particularly with tech? And I see this a lot. I would say this past year, I have a lot of clients who pivoted into tech from another industry. Like one of my biggest examples is someone going from nonprofit to tech. And, to me, a big part is going back to really understanding the type of roles that they're going after and what the hiring requirements are and how to reposition yourself to be a good match there. What's your advice?
I think you need to think of yourself and your experience as not being defined by the industries that you've worked in, but the skills that you've developed and the experiences that you've had. Like, you could look at my resume and be like, that's a telco guy.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, I am, but telcos are also like the biggest e-commerce companies and the biggest retailers and have the biggest customer bases and like are experts in client experience and have more data than most organizations and are data experts. So do I want to brand myself as an individual who's focused on a specific industry? Or do I want to realize that maybe I'm going from nonprofit to tech? And back to my point from before, it's like some of those skills and experiences that you've developed that become very valuable. Maybe that person in nonprofit was really, really good at like administrating and running the organization in that environment. And that skill set was super valuable in tech because governance is super important, right? And so I think you need to step back and say, what are actually the skills that I have and the experiences that I have and how do they fit the role, and kind of remove the industry from the equation, because you might actually have a perceived skill gap that isn't real.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a very, very good point what you said. You may have a perceived skill that that's not actually real there. You may think you're lacking that, but it may not be. And how do I translate that? And a big part, I would say, from my experience, because I've supported so many clients making this pivot in industries, is really connecting the dots. By big part is understanding this new industry a little bit, the lingo that they use, and how to use that right language to connect the dots as well. And oftentimes, I would say these other industries, I say they would value people with that fresh perspective coming in as well. Like I see a
Absolutely.
lot of telco folks moving into financial services or the insurance industry as well. So it's totally doable there. We have a question here from the audience on going back to networking is how do you approach the connections within your network to talk about your career without seeming desperate? And I hear this a lot without feeling like I'm desperate asking for help or asking for a favor. The approach around that.
Yeah, I think Floyd, it goes back to what we spoke about before a little bit, and maybe I'll just kind of add some more color, which is, are you being strategic about your next career move? So, and start to look at like how you approach those folks strategically. So if you're reaching out to somebody to have a conversation and they respond back and you get on a call with them, you can say, hey, here's my current situation, here's where I'm going, and here's why I think this conversation with you is valuable, or what I'm hoping to get out of this conversation. So I think it's more around less spray and pray, and it's more about like, is there a reason or a very deliberate approach to that individual you're reaching out to? And I think that can go a long way in getting the inside or getting the details you need from that person to help answer a question, to open up an opportunity. Because if you want that individual to refer you for something, because they're putting their then personal brand on the line to refer you for an opportunity, there's got to be a fit and got to be a match, right? And so, but you can demonstrate that through doing your homework. Hey, whomever, here's why I'm reaching out. Here's what I've done. Here's the opportunity. Here's why there's a great fit. So if this person you're reaching out to is going to refer you because there's an open job in their company, would they feel comfortable putting their personal brand on the line to refer you or recommend you is super important. And so you need to think about that. And if the answer is no, and you're not confident that they will, maybe you don't engage.
Yeah, that is such great advice around the piece of asking people even to refer you for opportunities. I think you really have to build the rapport and trust and relationships. Like for me, for me to even recommend someone, like I want to make sure that I know them, and even for my clients to make the referral, like I actually ask them to do their work of coming up with their branding message to make it easier for someone to endorse them as well, so that we have this also branding message of how they want to be seen and perceived as well, and that increases the odds of getting an opportunity there. But one of the things that you said, don't do the spray and pray approach. I cannot agree more. I recently had someone on LinkedIn who sent me a message to 50 other people, like hiring managers, executives, all in this thread of like, hey, I'm looking for an opportunity. If you have anything, let me know. And then a bunch of people just left the conversation instantly. And that's not an effective approach, like just doing the mass approach, which is reaching out to a bunch of people in your LinkedIn network. It's easy. What is not effective there?
Yeah, and also say like, God bless HR, but they're not necessarily the decision makers, right? You have to figure out who are the hiring folks and who are making the hiring decisions. So HR plays such a valuable role in so many of this, but at the end of the day, like the buck stops with the hiring manager. So like, what are you doing to seek out that individual? So your tactic, maybe even in that example, Diana, wasn't necessarily going to get that person too far anyways, versus really seeking out the type of job and the type of company, who's the decision maker, do you have connections to that decision maker, and you just, again, back to being a bit strategic about it, but also being mindful of like who makes the call.
Who makes the call? Exactly. And that takes time. You got to do the research to find those right people as well, those
A
hiring
lot of
managers or the
work,
right
a
people. It's a lot
lot
of
of
work,
work.
right, to talk to people. So another question, we're going to be wrapping up soon here, folks. Just a couple more minutes here is, when applying to a manager director level role, how much focus is applied to past management experience?
It's a good question, Ben. I'll probably answer it a couple. It's important, so I can't get around it. But I also know the phenomenon of people who need to become a manager but haven't managed people before. It's kind of the way it is. Like that's every manager at some point hasn't managed people, and so the question I think, which is important, is what are the types of environments or situations you've been in where you've been able to influence people who don't work directly for you? This kind of idea of like influence without authority is like super valuable, right? And so if you can demonstrate that you've had the ability to work across teams or work across organizations to get stuff done with people who don't report to you, that respect you and work with you and would be like good references for you, that in some instances is actually harder to do than managing people directly, because at the end of the day, you're responsible for their objectives and their scoring and all of that corporate stuff, if you will. So I think what's important to think about is it's not about necessarily directly supporting people, but if you can actively demonstrate that you've worked and influenced others who don't work for you, and you know how to work across teams very well, and you can demonstrate that in a conversation, I think is super valuable. And there's always going to be a situation where, yes, like a new manager might not have managed people before, but if they can demonstrate they're really good at working across teams and are very collaborative, then that can go a long way in making you stand out for a manager or director position where maybe you haven't directly managed folks before.
Yeah, that's such great advice there. So, folks, I want to hear from you. What's your biggest takeaway from today's talk here? What action will you take? Share that with us there as we wrap up here. Shawn, tying back to our topic on how to unlock your career potential, what are things to consider for your career development plan? What should one invest in?
We should figure out I think strengths finders is helpful. I
Yeah.
always joke that you should have like a weakness finders tool. Are you like, it's obviously super important to be aware and mindful of the things you do very well. The question is, are you mindful and aware of the things you don't do very well? And then you should map out a plan. So, are the things that I do very well noticed and understood by people? And if they are, great. And if they're not, then what are you going to do to make sure people really know what you're good at and where your strengths are? And then the flip side to that is, so what are the areas of improvement that you want to invest in, and what are you going to do about it? So maybe you're not good at giving a presentation. Maybe you're not good at public speaking. Maybe you're not good, whatever those types of things are, right? And I think that you need to think about, so what is the topic? When will I know that I've arrived? What are the activities and the actions I can take to get there? Who are the folks that are going to mentor me on any one of those topics? And when is the time frame I got to hold myself accountable for? So you can see like a grid coming together, right? Pull out a good spreadsheet, build a grid. Here's the theme of the thing that I'm really good at and that I want to improve on. Here's how I know like I've arrived. So here's what good looks like. Here's maybe where I am. Here's kind of the the actions and tactics that I can take. Maybe it's like I can get on a call with Diana and do a test run of a presentation before I have to give it to the boss and get feedback from her. I'm going to work with Sally and Jimmy and whomever, and they're going to help me on each one of these things. And here's like a time frame that I'm going to create, to hold myself accountable for doing it. And so, that's some of the stuff that I used to do for myself and folks that I've mentored and supported in my career. And, hopefully that gives you a good handle on maybe how to break this down, systematically.
No, that's great advice there. Just to build on this is, what's your advice? Like for those who are looking to move to that next level and facing this little that imposter syndrome, feeling lack of confidence, what's your advice on just having more confidence in really owning the role, owning their leadership to thrive?
I was actually, I don't know if it was something you shared on LinkedIn. I was reading something from somebody the other day. This person's like in a new VP role, and they feel like they're suffering from imposter syndrome. So they, all the questions they have about the topic for a meeting that they're in, they don't understand, they're writing down. And then they're going to talk to the person after the meeting. But then what they've noticed is that all the questions that they're asking end up getting asked in the room by the most senior person in the room. And so they had this moment of like, so wait a second here, like I'm likely got promoted into the role for a reason. It's okay to admit you don't know something. And I think you have to just be comfortable, raising your hand in that conversation going, what's that acronym mean? I just got here, so I don't understand the background or the context on this project. Like, there's nothing wrong with asking those questions. And I actually think you will be seen in a much more positive light when you ask those questions in discussion. No one's going to
Yeah.
go when you're like 2 weeks into the job and, Sally's asking, a pretty basic question in a meeting. They're going to go like, good for her. Like, she's digging in, like she knows what's going on. Like, that's respectable versus you just sitting there quiet, kind of not feeling like you understand what's going on.
Yeah. I love that. I saw that post. I think it was the post I did click on,
Yeah, I don't
that
know. Maybe it
post.
was you. I don't know who it
I did
was.
click on, I
Yeah.
saw that post,
Yeah.
but it's such great advice, right? That you may think it's, I don't know, a dumb question or you shouldn't be asking that, but then you realize like other people were thinking that and they raised their hand, they spoke up. And yeah, it's all about being curious, asking questions as well, right?
That's a good value. Curiosity is a great value. Like right back to the beginning, right? Around like, what are the things, that we value? And if you actually think about some of the stuff we talked about today, we talked about courage, talked about respect, talked about integrity and vulnerability, talked about being bold. So a little
Yeah,
bit of that kind of ties back. And you have to remember, like, you just got promoted into a director job or a VP job. There's a reason why you're there.
exactly. Exactly. There's a reason why you're there. All right. So my final question, and folks, type in what you're learning so far. There's still an audience here I see on the LinkedIn. So this is amazing to see such an active audience. Shawn, what's your final advice on managing your career and job search? What can one start doing now?
I think it's going back to like, and it's funny. So, when I'm thinking about my next search, literally day 2, 3, whatever it is, I'm spending a lot of time thinking about like my values and where my passion lies and, what I truly want to do. And that's where I'm spending my time and making sure there's lots of jobs out there. Like you said, Diana, it's a market for candidates. Like it's insane. So if like you're at that like director, VP level, manager level, the volume of jobs out there is like, I don't think we've ever seen anything like it. And so you have to make sure that you're being a little bit picky, meaning, when I step back and I think about the things that are most important to me in the next opportunity, I think about values, I think about culture, I think about leadership, I think about an appetite to invest, I think about those types of things more than I think about an industry, more than I think about money, more than I think about like the size. I've managed a team of like 900 before. I'll get in a call, but like, Shawn, this job's only 100 people. Like, it's not as big. I'm like, that's not important. Like, that's not important. Like, it's not about the size of the organization. That's important. It's about like, do the values of the company align with your values? What does the culture stand for? And what does it kind of believe in? Do they have an appetite to invest? Are the folks that are around you people that you're going to learn from and are good leaders? I would say start there. And like, that's what you should be looking for. And if you do that well, opportunities come, money will come, big scope will come, but you got to start at the basics.
Yeah. Yeah. That's such great advice. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much. I learned so much about you today, Shawn, as well. Thank you so much for your time and insights about who you are as a leader as well, your philosophy. I love that. And what I'm hearing as a takeaway here, a big part at the end of the day is alignment of what you stand for as an individual in terms of your values and what you're choosing to go after in your opportunity. I think that's really key. Number 2, like I really resonate with you when you talked about respect, credibility, and trust. Like I think that is huge, huge, huge. Like as a leader there. And a third piece is really around this whole relationship building, networking, connecting with people, like really putting yourself out there to check in with people, to build these relationships there. It's also about adding value and helping each other out. So thank you for that. Yeah, we have an audience who's sharing their takeaways here around your network is your career village. And like a village, you have to live with compassion, kindness, and respect. My biggest takeaway here, focus on areas such as values, passion, and culture. Yes, amazing. Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this engaging conversation. It was great. If you liked it, share it with your network as well. Give us a like and thumbs up here. The replay will be available on my YouTube channel as well. I'll be adding timestamps later on. So hope you enjoyed this and share that. So thank you so much for your time today, Shawn. Really appreciate it.
Of course.
All right. Take care, everyone. Cheers.